Okay, I'm very pleased to welcome Matt Mehler to the podcast. Matt, thank you very much for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Johnny.
Brilliant. Okay, so you are the owner at PROcurement Solutions, and today we're going to be talking about services procurement and how it can be leveraged for growth, which I think is a really interesting topic. And we've kind of had some background conversations in and around this area, and also some interesting conversations around some of the work you've done in the past at some pretty amazing places. So would you be able to just kind of start us off by just giving us a little bit of background on what you do now and kind of what your journey has been through the industry to get to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, thanks for having me, and thanks for your listeners for dialing in. And the background really was typical sports guy wanting to continue my journey in soccer. And to do that here in America, college is really the next step. So for me, it was what D1 university I could go to, and found myself at Duquesne University in playing soccer. I always tell people I went there as an athlete and left as a scholar. I went there to play soccer, but found a real passion in supply chain management. An amazing professor that introduced me to what supply chain was, and then from there, the journey through procurement. I got an internship at Education Management Corporation, starting from the ground up. Which, yeah, I tell anybody and everybody who is young to just get experience, go out there in the field, learn it. And I did in procurement, and I loved it. I loved it so much that it's now 20 years I've been doing it. From education management, I went to New York. I got married in 08 and was in New York in 09, and got an opportunity to stand up a procurement operation with a left rack organization. With anybody from New York knows, they're large real estate owner operators, developers, so commercial, residential, construction. And then from there, that experience took me to Madison Square Garden. They did not have a subject matter expertise in procurement. Also, we're going through some systems improvement processes, which I had a lot of background in. So my history of procurement in facilities construction and then around systems added a lot of value. So from there, I was in those positions for 8 years or so, and then in the last year, I decided to package all of that up together and go out on my own to start PROcurement Solutions and specialize in procurement for facility construction in venues, but also in other businesses that have the general needs around corporate services, constructions, facilities, and the like. So, thanks again for having me. Look forward to the conversation.
No, my pleasure, and that's a great background. Really appreciate it. It's it's interesting looking at your kind of specialization within that area, but it obviously translates out. But at the base of it, you've got this appreciation and kind of love for procurement and the supply chain side of things. In terms of when you were studying, you obviously had I know you were pretty damn good at soccer or football as we call it over here, but how difficult was it to make that choice where you're kind of looking at the two different sides of what you were doing?
Yeah, and you're referring to sports and the supply chain.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. So really, the I had the best of both worlds for the couple years after I graduated. I actually had an agreement with my boss at the time at Education Management Corporation that I could work in adjusted hours 7 to 3, so that I can then make training every day of the week from 5 to 7 for the club. So I actually played semi-pro for the Pittsburgh Riverhounds for a few years after. Extremely rewarding experience, mostly because of the impact on the community and the kids that you get to have whenever they see you as this professional soccer player. Love to continue to play the game. But the transition from one to another, really, there's a lot of parallels between the two, believe it or not. And that's kind of why I enjoyed procurement coming out of the sports world. Procurement function relies on collaboration. Like, you have to understand your business partners, you have to understand how the business works, and you have to partner with them, right? Really, it's all about spend management. How does the business spend its money? And how can you do that if you don't understand how the business operates, right? You can't really optimize spend management, optimize the processes, the systems, if you don't understand how the business works. And you can't understand how the business works unless you develop those partnerships across the business. So it's almost like a team in a way, right? You have to understand your team's strengths and weaknesses. You have to bring that all together. And I've been on good teams and I've been on bad teams. And I prefer the ones that are good, that are successful, and understand what they need to do. And making that transition to me it was hard to leave the game, but it was fun to then pick up another challenge in this business world around procurement, to then understand, how do I take a business, how it functions, the different organizations, bring it all together to quote unquote win or be successful. And it's really taking that same mindset from one to the next.
Yeah, because I guess when you look at it, the strategic and tactical nature of having that holistic procurement viewpoint is quite similar to the strategic and tactical nature of how you operate as part of a successful team. So I think that's quite a fascinating observation, but clearly you're motivated towards that strategic objective and that kind of teamwork side of it, which I
Right.
think is quite interesting, because you mentioned about collaboration and dealing with the wider business. I sometimes feel that that's something that doesn't get quite appreciated in the way that it should do about procurement. I mean, what was it about that that kind of really drew you to it in terms of operating with different parts of the business?
I enjoy building the relationships, honestly. I think that's one thing that procurement could probably do a better job of holistically across the industry. Understand that developing those relationships through true empathy and trust, and building that trust, really results in the greatest outcome, right? You have to come to the table with no other objective other than helping those that you service within the business, right? You have to truly come to the table with that mindset, not a goal of, I have to get X amount of savings, I have to get X amount of spend under, I have to get this data, it's not that. It's, how do I help you? When I help you run your business better, you then open up to me about your business. And then that allows me to then understand that, to put it into practice as it relates to what my needs are. So when you prioritize around the business, and building those relationships and understanding how it operates, you then in turn achieve the objectives you need to around the procurement functions, right? It may be controlling spend, it may be managing services and third-party relationships in the spend. How do you do that? You can't do that unless you have those relationships, because the reality is the majority of the spend and the majority of the transactions and the things that procurement is responsible for, in some sense, is really built out of the business, right? The business has the need for that good or service. The business has the budget for that good or service, right? So it's really starting at the base of understanding the business, building those relationships. And again, similar to sports, if you don't have those elements and foundation, right, you don't really have a good team, right? If you don't have a good leadership with a good strategy, and then relationships across the team that want to do the same thing, that want to have the same goals and support each other, you don't win on the field the same way as you don't win in the business world.
Yeah, and it also ties into the kind of specialization of roles. You talked earlier about systems, process, and policy, and that's not everyone's cup of tea. It's not everyone's favorite, but really that's not the responsibility of necessarily everyone else in the business. It might be the subject matter experts within procurement. That's their way of solving a problem. But what you're talking about with relationships makes a lot of sense to me, because if you can build those relationships, then you can communicate the value of what you're doing around systems, process, and policy, get people to buy
That's
into
right.
it. And I guess that's where the value comes from. But without the relationships, people can kind of reject that and see it as an obstacle, would you say?
Agree. I mean, I don't think anybody wants to start a conversation out with, I'm here because the policy requires me to be, right? Like, no, nobody, nobody, including procurement, by the way. I've been in a long time, and I know those conversations happen at times. Nobody enjoys those, right? You enjoy the ones where you really try to understand each other and you try to help each other. Does it always happen? Let's be real. No, not always. But I do feel success is at the end of when you come to the table with true empathy, with a desire to understand the business, and a desire to solution for the business, right? That's the other thing. Sometimes we have a mindset of what is right, from our procurement experience and our what we know best practices. And there may be some truth to that, but every business is different. Every business, not only is every business different, every organization within a business is different, right? So you have to understand, using some tech language, you have to understand what their business requirements are, right? What is important to them? first before you build system, strategy, process on top of that. And if you try to go the other way around, and just say you're there because of the policy, you're not really understanding what's important, and you're never really going to get to where you need to with whatever the conversation is.
Yeah, I feel like from my previous conversations with you and from some of the stuff you're bringing up, there's a quite a strong focus around leadership, effective leadership. So obviously that's clearly something that's very, very important in sports teams and that side of life, but within the business world as well. And I think, you know, being able to work for a company where they can clearly communicate their overall strategy and objectives is so empowering for everybody within that organization. And if, you know, procurement, if you've got a motivated procurement function that's saying, right, okay, how can we achieve excellence? What's a really good result look like? You've got to understand the overall objective. Do you think that, I mean, when you speak to your peers, do you think most people are in that situation, or do you think organizations do a good job of communicating that?
I'll say in the last few years, it's been clearer communication. And that's really a function of the change in the environment. When it's pretty typical, when times are good, people aren't as focused on the cost side of the business, right? The revenue's coming in, everything's great. There's less questions about it as it relates to the goals around procurement and savings and its impact and overall controls. Let's just say controls in general. However, switch to post-pandemic world, there's a lot more focus on how the dollar's being spent and how to best optimize that dollar. But then the other half of that is the risk element, right? I think we've understood now the risk in supply chains that exist that may not have been a conversation 2 to 3 years ago. People that weren't as focused on it now see the impact of your business and the potential delays or disruptions it causes to your business if you don't have a clear look back into your supply chain, understanding of lead times and those relationships and how those relationships rely on the industries that they rely on. You know, it may be a service-based contract, but that service may rely on materials and other goods to perform its work in order to do it in a timely manner. And those were, I think, components that may not have been a conversation before, but are now. And now you're seeing leadership at a high level come down with clear goals and expectations of what an organization should do around those cost management and or risk management in order to deliver, I'd say, you know, more effective results for the company.
So during that pandemic period, were you at MSG?
Yes.
That must have been pretty crazy in the sense of like the impact. That must have been nuts. I mean, as we've spoken before, I like the fact that you're, you know, guy who's clearly passionate about sports. And you're like, I think working at Madison Square Gardens might be pretty cool. And, you know, we discussed some of the amazing events. You know, I'm quite a fan of the UFC and some of the events in boxing, UFC, all sorts of amazing type events happening there. But that must have been pretty scary during the pandemic. It must have been so weird.
It was. And I think, you know, taken from the first moment when the conversation came up all the way through, I'll say restrictions lifted and everything, you know, it went from canceling events. There were some events and artists that were well ahead of the curve in regards to what the pandemic really meant and sitting around a boardroom and understanding what a COVID-19 virus really means and what is the last pandemic and sitting around C-suite and thinking about work from home strategies that typically aren't corporate culture policy, right? And then fast forward to a year or two later, everybody is at home, nobody's allowed in events at all, and your business literally relies on live experiences, right? And you're sitting there wondering, how do I, you know, what is the strategy moving forward from here? I give MSG and Jim Dolan a lot of credit, did their best to not only take care of as many employees as they could, top to bottom. And when I say top to bottom, don't forget, a lot of these venues are operated by, you know, I would say more blue collar positions, ticket takers, cleaners and staff that, you know, that were on payroll for months and months and months beyond what was typical of the industry. And then also, I'll say, you know, procurement roles and responsibilities and other corporate staff that stayed on the whole time, right? That there really wasn't a lot of revenue coming in, but stayed focused on the mission. And don't forget, they were also building the Sphere at the time, so there was still, a lot of work going on and a need to stay focused on the future of the organization. Then it was also a time to reset strategy and understand how do we improve things that we ultimately weren't focused on prior, but have the time to do now. But it was a really weird time, because from a procurement perspective, you were just trying to mitigate risk around whatever third-party contracts you had. You had to try to bring that all together, work with the stakeholders, including the third parties, to negotiate the best that you could out of those agreements, to salvage whatever cost, since what ones do you need, which ones do you don't need, and then ultimately, how do you come up out of this, scale down, and then be prepared to scale back, because no one knew what scale back looked like either at the time, right? That was the other major element. So you're planning for the unknown, and it was an interesting but fun time, especially as you mentioned, as being a sports guy and seeing behind the scenes of how these teams and these leagues were preparing themselves for what it may look like, right? And then you're a fan at home watching games. You're seeing the experience. They had fanless games for a while. So it was a really interesting time and a fun time, stressful time, but all in all, great experience.
Yeah, like you say, the kind of rebound was completely uncharted territory as well, and just as much of a problem in some ways. You've got to try and maintain relationships with the suppliers when you're not able to give them what they want, or what everyone was expecting before this all happened. And then suddenly you're having to prepare for, now we've got suddenly getting demand, we've got to ramp things up, we've got to do things in a different way. Do you think that that created more of an appreciation within the business for the procurement function?
Yeah, because it put us front and center, right? There were a lot of conversations on trying to make that happen, right? I think we were more often than before put in the spotlight at that leadership, C-suite, ownership level, in regards to what's possible, right? Because nobody knew what was possible, and we had to figure that out. We had to figure out what was normal, what was able to be done. Take a simple example. I had someone on the team that did a lot of the canvas covers, the covers over top of the seats, right? That's a huge expense for an organization that has no fans sitting in those seats, right? And then you have the lead times, the material shortages coming out of China, the production issues, and all those things. And at the end of the day, the owner just wanted a cost-effective solution that looked good on TV, right? And had the branding components, because there's other, the other part of the sports entertainment world, a lot of the advertising and marketing elements of what goes on the screen, all have to be coordinated into this, right? And procurement has a lead role in bringing that all together and understanding that process, and again, that collaboration between all the organizations that it takes to put on that final act. So it was a lot more emphasis on the function, for the good, really, to then really step up and show the value that the organization can benefit from whenever true collaboration, when procurement's at the table, helping them drive results.
Yeah, and you just touched on another point there, which is this kind of like two-way relationship, where effectively some of your suppliers can effectively be sponsors, or your clients as well. So again, that really emphasizes the importance of those relationships, especially in a tough time.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was on my interview going into Madison Square Garden, is how did I feel about that component of procurement? And honestly, I was open to it. I didn't understand the real impact to the day-to-day and the real opportunity that it was going in, but that's ultimately why I enjoy procurement in the sports and entertainment space, is that component of the marketing partnerships, sponsorships piece. And I got to tell you, it makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable, because there is this give back component, right? We're so used to in procurement, I'll give you money for you to do something, you do it for me, and then I'm going to tell you how I think you did for it for me in regards to that, right? That supplier management component. But when there's reciprocated money back into your business, which really, in my opinion, is true partnership, right? Because now I'm accountable to deliver something to you. And am I delivering something to you, right? Am I upholding my value back to your organization for your reinvestment back in me. I'm investing in you and your business. You're providing a good service. Now here I am investing you investing back in me. Now am I providing value back to you? And honestly, it's a difficult line to walk for a lot of procurement folks. But for me, it was very simple. For me, it's all integrity based, relationship based business that truly is valuable for all parties when done appropriately. So when you go through the procurement process and you evaluate the marketplace and you understand what businesses, what goods or services procured from what businesses are the best for your organization, and then you get to that point and you say yes via scorecard or however you manage that process, you say these two or three, or even just if it's one company can do this thing or these things for me, and they're interested in spending money back, right? It's now a total cost of ownership view, right? Now you're evaluating, okay, I'm spending money against how much money am I receiving back? And then ultimately, whoever is the best value for the organization, you make that decision. And then there's multiple elements of that supplier management, right? You also have to manage the element of, are they feeling like they're getting the most out of your organization? And procurement can play an important role on that, because it's all relationship management. It's the constant communication that it takes to manage that relationship productively, ultimately for the best for all parties, right? To make sure that, there were times when, believe it or not, we would get more money back from the vendor than we were spending with them, right? It wasn't always just, if I spend $1 with you, I'll give you 20 cents back. It could have been, it just made sense for them to leverage the Madison Square Garden brand for what it was. Or ultimately, I did some work for ASM Global after leaving Madison Square Garden. And again, there's just some third parties that are more interested at the time to invest in the branding with co-branding with these venues, that it's important for them in the growth stage of their business, right? So how are you helping them grow? And procurement's role in managing that process is very critical.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. And ultimately, if you've got that two-way relationship, it leads to the potential for really aligned objectives. Everybody's rowing in the same direction. You're all going towards the same objective. We want to make this successful. We want to make this event as successful as possible. If you're providing security, it's got to go smoothly. If you're providing catering or whatever, that's got to work. And your name's on this. So, if it works well, it's going to make you look good. And I think that's really interesting. And, I can see the passion you have for like the venue operations space. I say, in some ways, hardly surprising, bearing in mind you look at all the cool things that go on at these things. And we spoke briefly about the Las Vegas Sphere when we were chatting the other day. It just looks incredible. But it's quite a unique scenario, really. And I think that puts you in an interesting position as a specialist to be able to take that to other people in that space, and also take it to adjacent spaces that are going to have similar kind of criteria. And it's big business. I do find it weird, though, in some ways, that maybe the procurement functions in these type of organizations are fairly immature. Do you think, is that true? And if so, why is that the case?
Yeah, it is typically. And a lot of that comes down to the structure of the industry. There's certainly some large players in the game. So, for example, ASM Global does have a procurement organization. Madison Square Garden does have a procurement organization. But those entities as a whole have a large operating portfolio. ASM Global, 350 plus venues that they operate. Madison Square Garden, 5 plus, but other business lines with the sports teams and so forth. They just have a lot of spend. They have a lot of value in the procurement function. You spread across the industry as a whole, it's often individual owners, billionaires, a family that owns real estate, also buys a sports team, also owns and operates a venue. It's not as large of an operation. It's not more of a portfolio management. It's more around an individual business. And I think that's why you don't see as much sophistication and as much investment in the procurement function across those organizations. However, you're starting to see it a lot more again post-pandemic. There's also an increase in salaries to the players and an increased cost of the business. So I'm starting to read more articles and starting to experience a greater desire for the function, even if it's on a consultant basis, even if it's on a smaller, I'll say it, less strategic, because just to define strategic, I think, it's not just the strategic sourcing piece, it's the procurement operations, it's the people, process, technology mindset that we know procurement, when done as a best practice, can make an impact on the business. But even on a small scale, I do see a lot more teams and a lot more venues interested in understanding how to set up a procurement operation and asking for those services because of the increased costs. And I think Live Nation recently reported a 20% increase in overall ticket demand, which clearly shows that the industry as a whole is seeing a demand coming out of the pandemic. There's this thirst for live entertainment, right? We sat in our house for years, right? We want to start interacting with people again, and we want to spend our money there. So there's a reinvestment into the facilities that host these events, either new facilities. Every time I turn around, SBJ has a new article about another venue being built in the industry, or major renovations going on in existing venues to then increase the customer experience. All of that demand on the front end obviously increases costs, right? Sure, you have an increase of revenue because you have a greater demand, but you have an increase of cost in your business. And for that, you start to see a little more interest than you have historically for the function across the leagues.
Yeah, so I guess that ties into the kind of reinvestment and growth phase that we're looking at within that industry at the moment. I think, when we've previously spoken, you've mentioned the phrase kind of per capita in terms of the value per person visiting a particular event, and that's at a high at the moment. So that creates an opportunity, but then you've got the cost side of it. I mean, as I think I mentioned to you before, I was in Texas recently, went to a Dallas Cowboys game, unbelievable stadium, amazing experience, just fantastic day, and a proper full day of just absolute entertainment and fun. But there's a lot to it. There's a hell of a lot to it. And there's a lot of considerations for cost. But as you say, when you're looking at that kind of opportunity for reinvestment, it's not just business as usual, is it?
No, it's not. You have to rethink what that experience looks like. And then you also have to consider the limitations and the challenges with the limitations of existing infrastructure, right? There's certain, ways that a building can operate given its physical structure, but that also challenges businesses to think, how could I change the customer experience, widening corridors for greater customer flow in between events, and how do I reduce line queuing? It's all about almost a frictionless kind of experience from the time you even think about getting to the venue. A lot of people don't realize, as operators, it's also starting to think about when you're home. How do I make sure I get to the venue successfully? How do I have my digital tickets? Make sure that experience is, I walk up, I barely stand in line. And then the security component of that with the Evolves and Extract One masks scanning technology that's now at the front doors of these places. Then to go in, and how do I make sure I can buy something as quickly as possible without standing in line? There's so many elements of that. And then I go to my seat, I use the restroom. There's so much that goes into that experience and making sure that the guests that come there have the best experience that they possibly can. And there's a lot of technology components to that, right? There's a lot of technology and AI that can watch over that and give data points to the operators on that experience. Believe it or not, it gets down into the, going back to the facilities experience. There's technology inside of paper towel dispensers to know when they're low so that you can refill them. There's no shortage of solutions. And the question is, how do you prioritize those for an organization? How do you optimize your spend as it relates to all those so you can give the best possible experience to a guest at, from an operating perspective at the lowest possible cost? And you look at even in F&B world right now, that's probably one of the biggest elements. I'd say the two biggest elements right now in the sports entertainment space that are really changing the game is overall fan experience, where they're changing regular seating to more lounges and more experience based while you're watching the game, more standing and collaboration type spaces, to use that word again, but then also touchless around the F&B. They're leveraging technology for pouring systems. You're seeing a lot more of that quote unquote Amazon Go type systems where you go in, you grab your food or drink, and you walk out with only scanning your card before you go in. So a lot of different experiences going on in the venue space, which ultimately is an investment, which increase your costs, and trying to manage that at a time where there's a lot of changes going on. It becomes challenging for organizations.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if you're operating in that kind of premium mode, where the ticket prices are going up, the per capita is going up, but one little thing that doesn't go right can ruin the experience for somebody and can give them a negative feeling. So obviously, with the way that this industry kind of operates, there are services. Procurement of services is very important in the context of there are a lot of ongoing services, maintenance, facilities, catering, all the different things that are going on. And that's always been the case. And I guess in that circumstance, you might well be working as a venue operator. You might well be working with not necessarily a massive number, but a few fairly large vendors that are covering certain aspects, whether it's security, food and beverage, whatever it might be. But I find it quite interesting moving from these kind of like KPI-based ongoing services into the more outcome-based project style services, which are naturally aligned with the reinvestment side of it. And I think for me, that feels like that adds a significant amount of complexity to the procurement side of things. When you've got to go out and find new vendors, you've got to look at services you're not necessarily haven't been using regularly. Have you seen that impact the market, or are you seeing that start to impact the market now?
Yeah, I did, even when I was at Madison Square Garden. I mean, it becomes challenging. I think if any of your listeners could agree, it's not like as we spend more, we constantly get more resources to manage that spend, right? It's not like the operations goes, hey, I got a budget approval for 4 new projects, and let me hire those people to manage those projects. You're really being challenged to do more with the same, if not less, right? So how do I do that? You really look for efficiencies. I keep using the words scalable, sustainable. Every time I think of a process, it's got to be scalable and sustainable. And anytime you could leverage technology or leverage some sort of solution to do that for you, or at least help manage it for efficiency, it allows you to scale that a little greater, right? Because you still have all the same components in this venue world. The show, I always say, the show has to go on. It doesn't stop because you have these other 4 or 5 projects. And these 4 or 5 projects may have tentacles that have 10 projects underneath the 4 or 5. So you're really talking, you can get 20 to 30 different initiatives that you have to manage on top of your typical, make sure that the venue operates the way that it's supposed to, that the guest experience coming through the door till the time they leave the door is the same and or better, and that they're enjoying that show that has to happen. But then you have these other projects, and to do that well and keep up with all the variables underneath each one, the different service levels, and especially as procurement, we're mindful that we try to put as many service levels in there so we get the deliverable that we need at the end of that commitment. It becomes challenging, almost impossible to manage that, especially in a decentralized model where the business doesn't have, the procurement support. And if the procurement support has the resources to even keep up with that demand, right? It's very challenging to do that in a manual way. So you really need to leverage some sort of technology solution to do that for you.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the kind of procurement technology landscape, which has absolutely exploded over the last 3 to 4 years. Dr. Eloise Epstein at Kearney has this kind of market map. And, when she first started doing it, it was, it wasn't threadbare, but it wasn't packed. It's just absolutely expanded. It's incredible. There's so many, and that's a selection of kind of like the best vendors that, that fit into the different categories. But I think that's a very good indication of the requirement for technology to be used to underpin that scalability and that sustainability. It's interesting. I was presenting at a the Consultancy Procurement Council conference in the UK in London recently, or really very much for kind of consultancy and professional services category managers and senior procurement people in that area, run by the Consultancy Procurement Council. And we did a presentation on what we're doing using generative AI to create requirement specifications. So super cool stuff. We've got a tool called Scope IQ, which is really leveraging this stuff to do some pretty amazing things. But it's quite interesting when you drill into the detail of it, and when you're getting questions from people, they're asking about things like IP, data security. Obviously helps when you get people like Microsoft getting involved. But also things like, is AI, whose job is this going to take? And it's really interesting. I look at the use of technology, automation, whether it's using AI or not within procurement. It's not there to take people's jobs. It's there to automate the stuff that needs to be automated. You've got some procurement teams, if they're not supported effectively by technology, they're drowning in the manual process. It's very transactional. They can't get into that strategic or even tactical mindset that you were kind of talking about earlier of trying to align with the business objectives. And certainly with the AI thing, I think it's quite interesting. Obviously, it's all happening very, very quickly. Where it all goes, who knows from here, but it's certainly interesting. But I'm taking the approach of looking at it as a tool to be utilized. And, people say AI is going to take people's jobs. Well, in the short term, it's going to be people that are using AI that are going to take other people's jobs because they're just going to be more effective. So I think
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, it's like, there's as procurement evolves as a function, and it's quite a young function if you compare it to some other business functions, particularly within certain industries. So in terms of its involvement, the procurement technology landscape is not as evolved or as advanced, for example, as the marketing technology landscape, but it's getting there. There's lots of investment. There's lots of big unicorn companies coming out of it that are really growing rapidly. So I think there's always been slightly more concern within areas like procurement than, for example, marketing, that, hang on, what's this automation going to do to my job? But I only see it as a positive thing in the sense that it's got to elevate people so they can get more thinking involved, concentrate on those relationships, and actually just all the stuff that's just repetitive transactional stuff, just automate it. But
Yeah.
do you think there's a bit of an inherent kind of concern about that in some organizations, some procurement teams?
I see and hear it a lot. To me, if you're worried about AI taking your job, you really should go back and get some more education and understand A, what AI is, and B, what you're really doing for the organization. Because at no time should that system be able to take over what you're doing. And if that is something that you're doing, you should really repurpose, your time and your effort into doing something more productive, right? Because I agree, it's really just an enabler. It's allowing us to do our jobs better. You should be, if any of your listeners are in procurement and they're out there right now and they're not using ChatGPT and they're not trying to understand how AI is changing procurement, they should, because it is the future. It is going to be where it's going to end up. And I actually, one piece of that I'm not sure I agree wholeheartedly on is that AI isn't that new. It's been around for a while. It's just starting to really take shape in our conversations in business, in the applications, especially in the procurement world. But it's been around a long time, and it is growing. If you're looking at the curve, I think it is quickly getting itself into business now more than the time it's been around. And I think that ChatGPT is probably what brought that to the forefront, just it being so consumer, at everybody's fingertips and able to do some really cool stuff in a very simple form. And it brought this buzz around the function. But the reality is it's been a while. It's been around for a while. I think there's some legitimacy towards the risks and the data elements and how do we make sure that it's being used positively. But as it relates to the procurement function, it absolutely needs to be inherent in everything that we do around transaction management, because that's not the best use of time. And we were, as a business, we always struggle around that piece of it, right? The data piece, the managing the contracts, the managing the spend, the transactions around that. If I could just easily have a system to do that for me versus having to manually request from my team to pull information and to put it in a pivot table and to do that and the other, everybody's going to benefit from that. They're going to benefit because now they're using their time more productively to think better instead of to do manual tasks, right? So I do believe there is a quick shift. It's been around a while, but there is a quick shift. And if folks in procurement aren't currently spending their time on understanding it and trying to apply it in their either personal life, and personal, I mean, not just their personal, but also their how their function is at their job and their responsibilities, but also how the function as a whole can benefit from some leverage of technology and AI, then I think they're doing a disservice to themselves and their organizations, because it is the future. If it's not already there in companies, it needs to be.
Yeah, and ultimately, when procurement teams are being asked to do more with the same resources, you know, how are you going to do that? You can't just continue working in an inefficient manner. You've got to increase that efficiency to be able to do more and to be able to make it scalable and sustainable. But I think also it's just like, you know, quality of work life. I was at a conference, I think it was last year. Beginning of last year. I found it really interesting. There were various procurement leaders from some organizations talking about the increase in the use of technology, procurement digital transformation. And there was one guy in particular who I thought was really interesting because he just stood out, because he was just totally embracing it. This is the way we need to move forward. You know, we should be automating the stuff that needs to be automated. We should be upskilling our procurement teams, getting more into the data analytics, building better relationships with our internal stakeholders, with our suppliers, really trying to get an edge on our competition and using the procurement function as part of that business's kind of forward progress and cutting edge. Whereas I was really shocked that some of the procurement leaders that were there were really like, you know, it's not about that. That's not really that important. You know, the way we're doing things kind of, you know, if it's not broken, don't try and fix it. And I was thinking, how the hell are those people going to recruit young graduates, bright people with the type of skills that procurement teams need these days into their organization if they get in there and go, this is ridiculous, this is archaic, I'm using these awful systems, manual processes, I don't want to spend my time doing that, I don't run my personal life like that. And I think that's a real oversight. As the procurement function evolves, people are upskilling. You know, it's getting into it's enabling people to move away from those transactional activities. Why would anyone want to stay like that? Because the youngsters coming into the market are not going to find that interesting or exciting.
Nor should they, really, because if you think about the function as a whole, 20, 30 years ago, there really wasn't many that went to school for that function, right? There wasn't a lot of people, there wasn't an education path. Like there just was, it wasn't there. It was purchasing, just to use some simple terms. The function was purchasing, you manage purchase orders. It was a back office, you know, non-value added function. You fast forward to 2023 and beyond, it has to add value, and it adds value through the data, through managing the spend in those relationships productively, efficiently, and leveraging technology. I mean, the fact we're even having this conversation in 2023 is mind-boggling to me, to be honest with you, because it's not like technology is new. We're sitting here on the screen having this conversation. It's so ingrained in our daily life with our phones and computers that it shouldn't even be a conversation. And AI is that next step for us as it relates to the technology stack, that our systems should be doing more for us. And we shouldn't be relying on people to do these menial tasks. Because to your point, A, they're not going to want to, and B, they're not fun to do. So why do we want to build a team around these non-value added recurring functions that have to be done? Why not leverage the technology to do that more cost effectively, more efficiently for you, and then hire smarter people to review that data and take action on it? Because that's the piece that AI will never, ever be able to take the replacement of a procurement role, right? There's constant action that has to be taken based on that data and that information. And that's where AI falls short. There's a human element of managing those relationships and that spend and the business, that as much technology as you layer on that, it's going to come down to people. And it's the people that understand that and make themselves valuable and understanding how to do that best, leveraging the data and leveraging what tools are available to do that better, that are going to excel.
Totally agree with you. I mean, particularly when it comes to areas like services procurement, which I feel have been underserved by the kind of legacy procurement suites. because ultimately they kind of developed out of ERP systems. So they were typically more predicated towards management of goods and materials, easy to define item that you are procuring. It's got this weight, this measurement, this number, this color, whatever it might be. Quite often there'd be a complex supply chain associated with it, but it's fairly binary what it is you're buying, and you can just compare costs and all that sort of thing. The growth of services is almost the polar opposite to that, in the sense you've generally got a simple supply chain, but you've got a very complicated, sometimes difficult to define thing that you're buying, where in some cases the goalposts are going to move during the delivery of that service. So I think with the complexity that exists around services procurement, this makes it even more imperative to take steps forward. Because if you look at the services that the organizations are procuring, how much of them are being measured, how much of them are being managed, and how can procurement people manage those interactions and those relationships if it's intangible? And I feel that there's definitely more of a problem in the area of services, particularly complex services, than it is in goods and materials, which is a fairly well solved problem on that side. You've got metrics, you can buy stuff in an Amazon style experience, guided buying, catalogs, etc. If you're buying consultancy, or you're buying complicated services, IT services, it's just not going to be like that. And particularly when you look at things like every venue's different. They've got different requirements, and no two projects are necessarily the same. So how do you feel that is an area where there is a role for technology, automation, AI, and basically anything that helps to play a part in that?
Yeah, I think you have to, because to your point, a lot of these procurement / purchasing systems, we're all SKU based, right? Description, quantity, price, and that's about it. And it's really hard to manage after the fact once you make those commitments, right? You may have a really good contract because you did a great job negotiating that contract. You have the subject matter expertise either within procurement or within the business to be mindful of those service elements that you need. You put good SLAs or service level agreements, clauses around what has to be delivered. And then it may end there, right? You then have to implement that into the business. You then have to have the resources to manage that. And it becomes very difficult if you don't have the right systems around that and the complexity around that, right? And I think it's easy to say there's service-based contracts that are not complex, but I actually find the majority of all service contracts are always complex. It may be something like cleaning. Sounds very easy, right? It's an individual that has to clean. However, a lot of variables to that cleaning. How about the height? What products are they using? Is there an innovation within the products that have to be used? What clauses around sustainability to meet our sustainability goals and ESGs? How about their hiring practices related to those services? And you just break down one simple component, and that was just in a 10-bit, 10-second little run. And there's way more than that. And how do I manage all of that across multiple services that are constantly changing, and the business may be constantly changing, let alone the market of the services that you're buying? You're trying to keep up with your industry as a whole. You expect your third parties to keep up with their industry. And how do you hold them accountable to that? And if you're not leveraging some sort of technology to do that, I promise you're leaving opportunities out there, and you're not really getting the best value out of that spend that you really could, and out of those relationships, because you just won't be able to do that all with your existing resources without leveraging the technology.
Yeah, I totally agree. You touched on an interesting point there, talking about the creation of the contract. And so we've got a supplier, we've got a master services agreement in place. We're going to draw down against that master services agreement and create a requirement that's going to turn into a scope of work and a statement of work or a work order for them to actually deliver a service. Where do you think the balance lies currently within most organizations in terms of the emphasis on that kind of sourcing process versus the downstream delivery side?
Yeah, I think unfortunately we put too much emphasis on just the sourcing component. There's too much just focus around, did I go through a process to procure this according to a policy or get bids, and do I have a contract? All those may be yes, and maybe they weren't even done to the best of the ability, but they were complete. Very little do you hear around the ongoing management? And really, as a business, what is one of the most challenging parts? It's the ongoing management, right? Because what becomes very reactionary could be proactive, meaning we're always just responding to the fire. Who didn't do something? What happened here? How come that didn't get done, right? Instead of proactively constantly managing those, to get the minimum requirement, and I say that really should be the goal. At minimum requirement, get what you need, right? And that's not even happening a lot, right? If you go and check in and you try to manage, you'll find that you're not even getting the minimum requirement. But really, you really should be striving for greater value. And really, if you try to let the blocking and tackling be done by the systems, right? And I say the blocking and tackling, the understanding of what those terms are and how to manage them and when I have to manage them and are they being managed, then I could then layer the smarts over top of that to ensure that I'm getting what I need, or ultimately what more that I need out of these third parties and out of the relationships. And if you don't have something helping you leverage that information, there's absolutely no way your internal teams, whether that's a procurement team or the business, and especially the business, right? Because they have to run the business and they got a lot more, responsibilities than just that one contract and just that one third party, right? So it becomes very challenging to do that in an internal environment if you're not leveraging some sort of tool to do that for you.
Yeah, and like you said earlier about the data, if you're running an SLA management meeting or a QBR or something like that, and you've got your business stakeholders there, you've got the supplier there, and procurement are there. If you haven't got metrics to use, what is it? Just an open conversation, kind of hearsay type conversation? It becomes quite difficult. But I find it very interesting when you look at the responsibility that procurement have on that downstream delivery, in the sense that typically within a lot of organizations, procurement are measured on cost savings, which are kind of defined and recognized at the point of sourcing. But actually, when you're buying services, that's totally dependent on what happens during delivery. So I think in a lot of organizations where they don't have that maturity around buying and managing services, it's the sourcing process is kind of all that they do. And it's partly all they're capable of doing if they haven't got the right technology. But also in terms of responsibility, maybe procurement sometimes feel, it kind of ends there, because what happens down the line is not my fault. If it's not delivered properly, what's that to do with procurement? I'm not really being measured on that. I feel like that's quite a big gap in some organizations, because, ultimately, are you being given what you were promised in the contract? Are they delivering what they said they would deliver? There has to be a responsibility on procurement for that to a certain extent, as I see it. Would you agree?
100%. And I'll up it one. Has our business needs changed since I executed that contract, right? Because you may have scaled up or down the need, and you may need to negotiate the best value at that point in time, right? There may be times when the business changed and you don't need as much, but you could have been overpaying if you didn't hold accountable that conversation to right size whatever the service is. And if you're not having those conversations and don't have the support and data to get you there, you're going to be missing out on a lot of opportunity. And it may be that you're also being proactive on the risk side of it. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're not having those conversations relative to service levels and commitments, and you don't identify proactively that your business is going to change, and maybe it's changing for the greater, and you need more services, there's going to be a point in time when that need actually arises. And if the supplier is not prepared for that, and you don't have the runway to negotiate it, there's going to be two things that could possibly happen. You're either not going to get the quality that you need when it comes time for that scaling up, or you're going to feel like you have no other option at that time, no leverage, and then you're going to get taken advantage of from a procurement perspective, right? You're not going to have any leverage in any type of additional, if you don't have the right clauses around the scaling up and you don't understand what that is, because sometimes that can't always be done in advance, right? You have less leverage at that time. So the more proactive you can be, it really mitigates the risk, both around the quality and performance of the work, but also around the cost component.
Yeah, and it ties very much into the kind of core principles of what you were saying at the start of our conversation around communication and collaboration stroke partnership. It's not just a question of beat the supplier up, get the deal, and then forget about it. It's a longer term relationship which I think, you know, with the work that you've done in the industry that you've been working in for the last few years, you've uniquely had that opportunity to really kind of see that in full effect, particularly with COVID having had that impact where you suddenly got to scale people down, then you got to scale them up. Quality, everyone wants the best possible quality. People want new experiences and better experiences. And I think it's really fascinating, to be honest. And you bring it to life very nicely, which is it's a good thing to be able to do within an industry like the kind of venue type space, because you know, that type of venue, people can get it. Everyone's been to a concert, a sports game, whatever it is, an event. And so people know what it's like to be in that experience. They know there's this buzz going on around them, and there's this big machine that's operating. And like you say, the kind of show goes on. So it's really nice to be able to kind of paint a picture with that. So I think hopefully that'll be interesting for people, whether they're in this industry as well or whether they're operating other areas where still the same principles do actually apply.
Agree. Yeah, and then to bring that all back around, when you're having those productive conversations with all the parties, that's really when the empathy and trust gets built, right? Because that now the business really feels like you're trying to help them ensure they're running their business right, right? You're having those proactive conversations and you're adding value to them. Because if you weren't there doing that, they may be in a position where they have to be more reactionary because they don't have the time to do that productively, right? So when we think about the procurement function, we have to think about how we add value to the business to ensure the longevity of our roles and the value that we provide, and utilizing those systems and that technology allows you to be more agile and support the business properly so that they want to work with you, right? That's what you really want at the end of the day. You want the real collaboration where they want to work with you because you have the tools, the experience, the subject matter expertise to help them run their business.
Yeah, and it's about them wanting to work with you, and it's also about the suppliers wanting to work with you as well, the best suppliers, and wanting to go above and beyond. I love it.
Right.
We've got some clients that will come to us with like this is our challenge. How can you help us? I love that. You know, as an organization, we really love to get our teeth into that sort of thing. You know, it's how can we innovate what we're doing from a technology standpoint? How can we improve our service? How can we go above and beyond? How can we get our heads together and solve this problem? That alignment as a supplier is a great feeling. And, you know, it's not just about just trying to watch the checks roll in.
Right.
It's about feeling like you're delivering real value, and that it's not a one-sided relationship. It's a collaboration to achieve you know, aligned objectives. And I know that can sound a little bit cheesy sometimes, and it depends how transactional the service or what it is that's being delivered. But at the very essence of it, if an organization is treating a supplier as a valued part of the overall team, you know, getting to that end point, if you can buy into that, I think it's extremely powerful. And I know certainly from my own experience, not just Zivio, but other businesses I've worked for in the past, where as a supplier you feel like you're engaged, people within those companies will go above and beyond, and they'll feel good doing it.
Agree. Yeah, and we saw a lot of that with the Sphere. Just because of how amazing of a project it was, you really felt everyone was vested in it. When everyone's vested in it, you get the best out of everybody, right? And you get the ultimate outcome. So it's a really good point that you made, that's where true, you know, I'll say where it's truly optimized is when you bring that triangle together of the procurement function, the business, and the supplier, and you're all aligned with your goals and you're supporting each other.
Brilliant stuff. So just to kind of wrap things up, in terms of looking at the work that you're going to be addressing over, you know, looking ahead to say 2024, what are the kind of things that are really getting you excited to be able to look at getting your teeth into, in terms of the type of organizations you're going to be working with, the type of challenges you're going to be kind of specifically trying to address? What's kind of like on the horizon as far as you see it?
I think it's a lot of what we're talking about here. There's really a shortage of good labor in the procurement field, honestly. So what I find the most value in, and it doesn't have to be in any of the categories or the type of industries. I've had a lot of success in the financial industry with a large client, Broadridge Financial. I just enjoy being a positive force for the procurement function, showing what the real function can do when done properly, when going through the process the right way, and understanding the requirements of the business, understanding the culture, understanding what the industry has to offer that organization, and bringing that all together for the most value. Obviously, cost savings is always a conversation in relation to it, and sure, that can be a guiding light for determining the value or the investment in the function, because it always has to be. I'm not trying to negate that. However, to me, the real fun in it is, with the passion that I have for the function, is just being a positive force that allows people to see what the function can be, so they want to have more procurement. They want to work more with procurement, and bringing that best practice, that best in class strategic vision to the table, and not that tactical, more along the lines of quick hit, get my savings and go, and the more collaboration, strategic vision. And I see that's really 2024 is trying to up the game of procurement. All the procurement, I'll call them experts, that I follow on LinkedIn and others, it's all about how to make the function more strategic in the future. I mean, I've seen it as a practitioner over the last 10 plus years. Even at the Left Rack organization, we were able to do with the function, and it was a smaller mid-sized real estate company. They saw the vision in strategic procurement. But I would say, even in the next 5 to 10 years, greater investment in technology and trying to leverage that for automation to do a lot of those, I'll say, day-to-day tactical tasks. And then ultimately, around running the function, is how do we add more value to the organization? And I think that's what you'll see continue to improve here, and then not just in 2024, but I would say the next 5 to 10 years.
I love it. And I think, talking about value doesn't take anything away from cost savings, but it's building on that. Cost savings is one dimensional. Value, it's the overall value to the business, whether it's, in some cases, even bringing in revenue, or actually, helping bring new products to market. It's bigger than just the cost savings. And I think that's the hurdle that, some procurement organizations definitely need to get over. And I thoroughly agree with you on that. But listen, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. Really enjoyed it. It's been really interesting. And I love the fact your enthusiasm really comes across. And I think, I know you do like sports coaching and stuff like that. And I think, the enthusiasm and the approach is clearly, there's a good crossover there. It's about teams. It's about working together towards an objective. And no, I think it's a really positive message. And I'm very grateful to you for coming on and having this conversation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity. Always enjoy it. And thanks again for your listeners for tuning in. Appreciate the time.
Brilliant. Excellent stuff. Well, thanks again. And hopefully we can catch up again soon.
Great. Thanks, Johnny.